Hello, welcome to History on Lowell. I'm Maritza Grooms, here with my partner in crime and my personal professor, Bob Forrant. And then we have some really special, exciting guests today from the Latinx Center for Community Empowerment. Welcome Maria Aybar and Diego Leonardo. Thank you for coming today. So Maria, you're the operations manager, and Diego, you're the executive director. So let's get into it. The Latinx Center for Community Empowerment. This is amazing. Tell us how it all started.
Well, I think I can start with that. It really started based on a community organization that we were just gathering to really gather about the differences between the Latino communities, different countries represented, and like what were the Puerto Ricans, what were the Dominicans saying, and then me being an outsider, those bigger groups being represented. I was just trying to soak information and be there. But we got into a point that we were talking so much about issues, but there was no action plan. There was no really a procedure or somebody that can we look after. And then with the help of some of the co-founders, I was really pushed into the water, and I was just at the end of my last semester for college, and then I decided let's make this happen. So we went through the E for All program. We did all the requirements that we needed to do, and now currently we are operating, and we work under the fiscal agency of CMAA.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, we really seek to promote unity across like the different Latinx groups in the city of Lowell. There's a need. We all have our different needs. The Latinos, we come from different countries. Many of us speak different languages. There's a variety of races. You have indigenous, Afro-Latinx people, Latinos, the mixtures. And we really just want to be able to understand what are those needs. How come Latinos are not participating in voting as much as other groups, for instance? How can we promote that? And yeah, we're definitely very excited to work on the different projects, being able to connect community members with each other, build a larger community, not only amongst the Latinos, but also other groups as well, Cambodians and different African groups in the city of Lowell as well. So yeah, this is amazing that we're doing this.
So when you talk about you both have made reference to lots of different populations from different countries. So for people listening, watching who might not know, in terms of an inventory, I guess would be one way to say it. What are the various countries represented here? Because I know a little bit, I'm sure I don't know all, for sure, in terms of what countries, but I think people would be surprised that there is such a diversity in the city.
For sure. So, I mean, the Latinx Community Center for Empowerment specifically works with incoming immigrants, because those are the ones that have the largest needs and the ones that actually are more open to receiving help of an organization that's newly funded. That's another thing that we just created this in 2018. So, we are trying to build trust across the community, and, it's something that takes time. As you may know, like CMA has been here for a long time, and slowly it's when you're able to, approach community members. So we're, of course, still building on that trust. But we mostly work with incoming immigrants. Many of them are from Central America, and also we work with Dominicans. But in the city of Lowell, one of the largest groups that you have are Colombians, Puerto Ricans. You also have Dominicans and Brazilians. And Brazilians, because of the language aspect, they speak Portuguese. We mostly have all of our volunteers and staff. We're all from countries that speak Spanish. So, we really try to work with other people from outside the communities to make sure that the needs of the Brazilian community are also met. But I just recently spoke with a teacher over at the high school, and she was telling me that the groups in Lowell, the demographics of the Latinx community have changed over the years. When I first was at Lowell High School, we were mostly like Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Colombians, the incoming groups, but now we have more Central Americans, like Guatemalans, Hondurans, and El Salvador. And also one of the largest groups at the high school are the Brazilians in terms of Latinx groups. So it's interesting to see how over the years, I've been here for 10 years, how things have changed so fast. Yeah.
And it's really important to highlight also that Lowell is very unique in its configuration, because if you go to Lawrence, that usually you get that comparison between Lowell and Lawrence because there's Spanish speaker communities there, but it's very dichotomy that goes in Lowell, in Lawrence versus Lowell. because Lawrence, it's mostly Dominican and Guatemalan, and that's the biggest number. But over here, it is shared among 5 different groups, which is what makes it really difficult at the beginning to access the communities, but it's also very exciting to see that there's so many different cultures that come together, and the language can unite us in that.
Yeah.
And
No, and I was gonna say too, I forgot about a group, the Ecuadorians as well. Many of them are indigenous, they identify as indigenous. So, you know, and there's a language, there's Quiche. So it's like, how do you, approach them? It's different as well. You have to go through they have their own leaders. So it's, we're definitely trying to work through those things, building trust across different communities in the Latinx population here in the city.
Wow. When you were going through the different groups, I immediately started thinking about what we talk about on the show when different immigrant groups come in and when they come in. And I thought about how we talked about the Colombian groups that came in and why, and coming in to work in the mills. And then in the 70s, right, that was like, that's when you really started seeing larger groups of Spanish-speaking cultures coming in. But it is very interesting and wild to think about how much that's changed and how you all are doing this work to try to bridge the gaps in between these communities, because people they think, oh, you all speak Spanish, so all of your culture is the same, right? They don't understand that everybody's got their own culture from when you come from. Even if the way you speak Spanish is a little bit different.
Yes.
I have a good story for that one. And, when I recently came to the country, I was going to get my driver's license, so I needed to get the driver's test. And when I was doing that, I took it in Spanish, and the Spanish that was in the translation was Caribbean Spanish. So it's totally different from the one that I was accustomed to and I grew up with, and I failed that test. And then I just went back and I said to the person, can I take it again? This time I'm going to take it in English because I think I can get it. And that's how different the languages are, and there's a lot of different words and contexts that are totally different, or the contrary. Some things can be good for one specific group, or some things can be really bad for other groups. So it's really interesting and exciting to see all those things coming into play.
Yeah. And that's why, when we do translations, we have to keep all those things into consideration for sure. It can get complex. It's very easy, you do a Google Translate, but it's like, that's completely wrong. You have to really think it through to make sure that everybody understands what you're trying to say, and everybody feels, included.
Yeah, oh wow, that is a lot of work that you're doing there. So what else does LCC do? What other projects are you working on right now?
So we also provide English classes, and we do that. We first did a survey because, of course, as you know, Lowell, we were a city of immigrants, and MCC, and different other organizations, they provide English courses. So we try to see, how do we fill this gap that we see that many people, they work during the morning and just don't have time to learn English. So we decided to have our classes during the evenings, so from 6 to 7 p.m. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, and also Saturday mornings as well. So that's one of our biggest programs that we have right now. We are also collaborating together with Lowell Votes to promote civic engagement, civic education, and really get Latinos and other groups that are underrepresented to go out and vote. So those are one of the things we're doing. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, we also work in advocacy, especially at the city level. When it comes to the pandemic, we were really advocating for the whole community, especially when it comes to testing, when it comes to vaccinations and information. And it's a good point that you're bringing this up, because when we're doing translations, some of the translations that were brought from the city weren't really making sense for the community, especially when we talk about a mask. It can be translated to 10 different ways. Oh, wow. And we need to find a way that it's more neutral to everybody. So it was very interesting to see how that came also in play, and how we also providing this type of knowledge to the city, because it's really something that we need to make aware that we are here, we're also contributing, we also need some help, and we can help out as well. So, yeah. And
we also have a new initiative as well, the Lowell Latinx Archive, that we're working together with Professor Forrant, Teresa Gonzalez, and also Professor Wilson Valentin Escobar, and also Tony Sampas from the Lowell Cultural Center. The Center for Lowell History. Yes. So yeah, we're really excited for that initiative as well.
So why, let's talk a bit about that. Obviously, that's near and dear to me as a historian. Why did you both feel the need to start to work to create such an archive? What was the motivator? And maybe like a little bit of what you've been doing. I know we've chatted, but a little bit about who you've been talking to and how you've been trying to get this thing off the ground in terms of talking to community people to get them to tell their stories, because maybe we'll have some people listening who very much might want to say, oh, okay, I've got a tale to tell.
Yeah, for sure.
And so they might want to plug into it at some point along the way. So maybe a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I actually was looking around one day and I came across this Jewish women archive, and I'm like, oh my God, it would be nice if we would have something like that, but only for Latinas in Lowell. But of course, like as I did my research, I realized we don't have anything for, anybody, no men, women, nothing. So I spoke with Diego about, this idea of creating something like this, especially because, Latinx members, I think that, many people see us and, oh, you just got here. You don't know what you're talking about, you don't know what you're doing. And we just want to be able to tell people that, we actually have a story in the city of Lowell. We have contributed for so long. Many people ask us, oh, how come you don't see, how come Latinos are not running for city council or school committee? And it's like we want to understand why, and that's why it's so important to go back and see what's our history, what have been some of the barriers that us as a group have had to deal with. Remember, many of us, some people are from Puerto Rico, but then you have people that are Dominicans, for instance, but they still live that immigrant experience. And it's very different when you have people that are refugees. Those are completely different kinds of barriers, different kinds of resources that you may or not be able to access. So we just wanted to understand, how come Latinos are not as engaged, how come, what's missing. And it's important to go back to history and learn about the different groups that have been created, the coalitions that have been formed in the past, and what happened, why did they stop. For instance, we, during our first meeting at the Lowell, the Center for Lowell History, we came across this Todos Unidos. Tony Sampas, he introduced us to this newspaper, Todos Unidos, that was, I think it started in 2000, and it just only circulated for 2 years. But it was it was amazing. Once I read it, I'm like, oh my God, the fact that Latinos were able to have something like this, where you had, educational resources for like jobs and just, information overall. So I really love that, and I think that we need to continue, centering Latino stories, put Latinx stories at the center. And we have been able to, and I think also it's a way to build community. We all are different. We might speak Spanish differently, may have different histories in our own countries, in our own, islands. However, we come here, and it's so hard when you start in a new country. So it's like, let's have those factors bring us together, those commonalities.
Yeah, that it's what totally she said. It's what we were looking for, the creation of community. That's what really makes sense, because as she was saying, some different people had different experiences, but you can also come together into sharing that story with somebody else and know, oh, I also went through that. And one of the things that I always like to remember is when I was taking a class in history of Boston, and the first Irish mayor of Boston, it was really rallying up behind all the people that were feeling that they were not being represented, and that it's only through history that they can be put into that place. And that's what we really want to find, representation in a way that creating history and also knowing what people have seen in the past, that we can also be able to learn from it and not just repeat what it's been happening in the past or what didn't work in the past, and just learn from that.
And people get so excited once you tell them, like, you've been living here for so long. Would you like to be part of this? Do you have something to share? Like yes, oh my God. I remember the first person that I actually talked to about this project. Her name is Altagracia Mena. She's Dominican, has been living in the city for over 50 years. And she was like, you are giving me a present. Like, I want to die in Lowell. All her family's in Florida. However, she's still here. Like, why? She just has this connection to the city of Lowell, and to be able to put her story at the center for people to learn from her path, it's like so important, especially elderly Latinos that many times you feel like I did what I had to do, like I'm done. It's like, no, you have so much more to give. So.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when I teach the history at UMass Lowell, one of the things I've been talking with my students about a lot is, what does it mean when you don't see yourself represented in history, when your story's not in the in history books. And so that was partly why I invited you to come to my class that day to talk about you and your experience, and Gordon Hom, who's been a guest on the show as well. Because I feel like that's more, I mean, that's what I can do at the university. I can figure out ways to create that. But with my students, I have lately had them reading this article, and it's like all kind of academic terms inside of it, but one of the key phrases is symbolic annihilation. Mm-hmm. That basically, when you don't appear in the story, you are in effect annihilated. You're whitewashed from the history. You're literally whitewashed in terms of who gets to tell the story. And so you're gone, right? And that's why I think what you're doing, what the Kindred Project, what Free Soil in Lowell is doing with uncovering Black history in Lowell, all of that stuff is so vital, because it's really, it's definitely missing from the city. Yeah. And I think the city's richer for people getting that story. So, yeah, I mean, what about, so I think about this a lot, because I feel like people lump together everything. There's a difference between, and I don't know whether it's felt in the community, if you're Puerto Rican, when you come here, you're already a citizen. And so that's very different, right? In terms of how people deal with the community, deal with voting, all sorts of other things. Do you run across that already in terms of what you're doing, or is that not an issue?
Well, it is, because, we have people that are undocumented, for instance, and say, you cannot just say, go vote, especially once they have identified as such, and it's really hard sometimes in terms of like access to resources in the community for people that are undocumented, for DACA undocumented students, for instance. So we also try to work with them as well. And recently, different schools in the city of Lowell now are more open to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just think it's the perfect time to kind of have these conversations about inclusivity, yes, it's important to include people in terms of the race and that kind of stuff, but also let's think about other ways and other people that we're leaving out, of the conversations. Yeah.
So you bring up a really good point, and usually we even during the Latinx community try to disseminate Puerto Rican stories as well, because we're like, well, you're already a citizen, what are you complaining about? But they also had their immigration story, and they being treated as such, because there's a different way that they can approach to services as well. So there's an open book for them when it comes to services that are provided by the city, and they're really focused to citizens. But there is the language that can create that barrier for them to really access those services. So that's when we also come in play, and we try to provide the word empowerment in our organization is really based on, we don't want to recreate something that it's already created, and we don't want to create dependency on services. We just want to make you aware that all here, it's for you. Just take advantage of it and utilize it as much as you can to be able to succeed on your own, and not to help for others to help you succeed. And that's what we try to do when it comes to different communities. We also try to empathize into their immigration status, because that's really important. That comes to play to what services they can access and what they cannot, and also comes into play of the elite experience that they can have, because some people can come here by a family member sponsoring them, but then that family member turn into them, and then they become homeless, or there is a problem between getting their documentation status, or they run out of their status, or there's so many other ways that can happen. And also because we have so many mixtures of immigration status on the community as well, we cannot just solely focus into one community. And just to go back with the Puerto Ricans, that's one of the groups that we also want to be able to encourage them to be part of the organization, because sometimes they feel left out, because most of the programs are just for immigrants, and they're like, but we also have this immigrant experience. What can you provide to us? And that's what we also trying to make that effort to bring them on the table and say, please tell us what is your story and what can we do for you.
Yeah, and there's also a trust factor as well. Many times you go to an organization or some sort of agency in the city, and they don't speak your language, or they didn't treat you fairly, and it's like, why would you go back in there? You just don't trust them anymore. And I think the same thing. When it comes to Latinos and voting, it's like they just don't feel that what they have going on in their lives, that it matters, and it's not like they don't care about their children's education, not like they don't care about the city of Lowell overall, but it's like, I don't think that they're hearing me. I don't think they really care about, what I am going through, what are my needs. So it's like, we just want to be able to build that trust. And it's something that, it's not just, LCCE, it's like a job of everybody in the community to make sure that people feel included, it's the job of the city councils to go into these communities where Latinos are and, and do that job themselves. And we, of course, are here to help because we really want Latinos, Latinx people to feel included in this city. And it's definitely a need. Yeah.
And it's also the case that for older people in the community that you're talking to get those stories, in their own memory of being in Lowell, for people that have been in the city, Spanish speakers, say since the late 80s, early 90s, their experience has been several campaigns in Lowell to make English the official language. And several times where people ran into blockades with trying to advocate for their children at school committee meetings, and sometimes parents wanting translation, and school committee members back in the 90s basically leaving the meeting, screaming at people, "This is America, learn English," and not listening to them. And so in terms of collecting stories, I think that's going to be powerful to hear from those folks, because if they're still here, which I think probably many of them are, now their children have children in the Lowell schools, right? If you think about this generationally, and I think it's really important to get, as you're assembling the stories, again, this is me, the history teacher talking, right? Like having those generational stories. A student of mine from Lawrence is doing a directed study where he grew up in Lawrence, his dad did, and his grandfather did. And he's doing oral history of the three of them for that exact reason, so that they can talk together about what they think is good, bad, indifferent over their lifetimes of all living in Lawrence. And I'm so excited to see when that's finally written up.
Yes, for sure.
And so I'm hoping that maybe that'll be something you'll be able to do.
No, we definitely, the Dominican flag raising is coming up on February 26th. The Dominican Independence Day is on the 27th, but, it's a Sunday, so we moved it to Saturday 26th, that's February. And we're planning to have an event, to have these generational dialogues, happening. We're bringing Altagracia Mena, like I mentioned, has been living here for 50 years, but also a young Dominican who we don't know yet who we're gonna have, but we're taking in resumes. No, I'm kidding. That we were like, there's so much talent. Like, who do we want to have? But I mean, those are the questions that we wanna ask them. Like, how did you build community? How was it? When you first came to Lowell? Because I know Altagracia, in her case, she went through a lot of racism and discrimination. And when listening to those stories, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't really see that. You know what I mean? I didn't really have those interactions yet. I've been discriminated, but I think in a way that's more subtle. Her was very, like to your face. And of course, that's something that really, affects you in different ways. However, in spite of it all, she was, so involved at church, in the community. She was like, I was the taxi driver of the whole community here. So it's like, and to be able to have a Dominican, a young Dominican growing up here, perhaps, has lived their life. It's like, how was your experience? How is it? How do you feel here in the city of Lowell? How do you see yourself in the future? How are you contributing? How do you build community nowadays too? Because things have changed. For Altagracia, her, community over at church was just like everything, and it still is. For a young person, that's not so much the case. At least in my case, I see LCCE and building community, with other groups, racial groups as well. It's like important to me as an individual, as Latina. So yeah, we definitely want to have more of those dialogues and more of the conversations, through different generations, but also different races as well, because that's definitely, I see it as a way to heal together, and to also provide resources. It's like, this is what's working for me, what can work for you.
Yeah. Well, this work is so important. And I, like, as we're talking about it, I just keep thinking about how so many groups now are starting to build these archives, are starting to do these oral histories, and like now seems to be the time where it's like, okay, we're going to strike while the iron's hot. You say that you care about DEI, but do you really? And how? And how are you going to show that support? So one thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking to are some of the stories that come out of this archive. I'm really curious to see how community leaders and people like when we were talking about the Black history, we found out about Bertie Malbury, who was the first Black woman to run for city council. I want to know that story for the Latinx community. You know, like I want to know about it because my grandparents came here. My grandfather was a migrant farmer, and he comes from Puerto Rico, but again, didn't have the exact immigration experience, definitely had the migrant experience, came here when they were very young, worked in like some mills somewhere, and then ended up being able to buy a house on Coburn Street and like establish some kind of something for our family. And then here I am being able to uplift other communities as I, do what I do. So what does that generational legacy look like for families? So have you found any interesting stories or any fun stories as you've been working on this project?
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to develop a great connection with Maria Cuestas. She's Cuban, one of the few Cuban Americans, that we have in the city of Lowell. She's like, her she told me that there's only 2 Cuban families. However, like in the 60s, more like 1960s or something, she came in 1962. There were more Cubans. There were 100 families that lived here. Yeah, and political asylees. So she told me her experience. Maria, she came because, of course, persecution to her family, but she had a very good lifestyle in Cuba. So to be to an extent wealthy and come to a country, and she never told me she was wealthy, but I saw in all the photos that she showed me. So I'm like, Maria, this was your quinceañera, Maria, this was your wedding, like what? Just beautiful, you know what I mean? And then coming to a country and people telling you, so though in Cuba did you have donkeys, and it's like, and Maria, she's light skinned, blue-eyed, and it's like she told me so many stories of discrimination that I'm like, how, but then she has an accent, she is from Cuba at the end of the day, and she had to endure all that, and in spite of it all, she got her PhD from UMass Lowell.
Wow. She
was told by a professor, you have a very thick accent, I don't think you're gonna make it here. So she told me that he told her that she had to write, the rest of the class had to write two pages, and she had to do 3. Because she had to learn more. She wasn't there yet. But she got an A at the end of the day. So, all these stories, and all these, that really hurt her still to this day. She's 80 years old, and also me, but to see how we have progressed, for better or for worse sometimes, at least was a little bit good. But I love to be able to connect with her, and it has been an amazing experience, because I came here and I don't have any connections to Lowell other than, my family here. And we came back in 2010. So to be able to speak with other people that have seen how Lowell has, changed over the years just was very beautiful. It's great. I love it. Yeah.
Well, I want to hear more about this, and I can't wait to see what else comes out of this. And thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about LCCE and the amazing work that you're doing. It's about time, and I'm so glad that you are the people who are doing the work. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you, Bob, for bringing them. And thank you all for tuning in. This has been History in Lowell.
Thank you.